Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. Get your notebooks ready because we are jumping right into our clinical rounds. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the fascinating world of amniotic fluid and the placenta. You know, these aren't just background elements of a pregnancy. They're literally dynamic, life-sustaining systems that tell us exactly how our tiny patients are doing way before they even take their first breath. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into our rounding list for the day. We're going to cover physiology and dynamics, visualizing the environment, the measurement protocols, recognizing abnormalities, and finally, how to explain all of this to expectant parents.
First up on the agenda, physiology and dynamics.
Stepping right into our first ward, let's talk about the makeup of this stuff. Amniotic fluid is this remarkable pale yellow solution that acts as a crucial physical cushion against mechanical injury. It's a barrier against infection, and it's the absolutely essential medium for symmetrical growth and fetal lung development. Now, while it's 98 to 99% water, that remaining 1 to 2%, it's highly complex. We're talking suspended fetal epithelial cells alongside equal parts organic materials, proteins, carbs, fats, enzymes, hormones, and inorganic salts. But here's what's absolutely vital to remember on the floor. This composition evolves. In early pregnancy, the fluid actually comes directly from the maternal blood. But as the pregnancy advances, fetal excreta are added to the mix. It's wild to think about how it builds.
So time for a quick pop quiz to keep you on your toes. Doctor, once we hit the second trimester and those tiny fetal kidneys kick into gear, how exactly does the fetus regulate the total fluid volume? Think about the inputs and the outputs here. Well, the answer starts with this number, 500. By the second trimester, it's estimated that about 500 milliliters of fetal urine is added to the amniotic fluid every single day. See, the fluid isn't just sitting there stagnant. It's constantly being formed and resorbed. To put that into perspective, this entire fluid volume goes through a complete replacement cycle approximately every 3 hours. Absolutely incredible. But obviously, an input requires an output to prevent overflowing, right? And that brings us to our next number, 400. Starting around 11 to 13 weeks of gestation, the fetus actually begins to swallow, and they swallow about 400 milliliters of fluid every single day. This constant, dynamic cycle of urinating and swallowing perfectly balances their little aquatic environment.
Now, as you track your patients, you really need to know the normal volume trajectory. It doesn't just go up forever. The volume increases relatively slowly as the pregnancy progresses. At 10 weeks, we're only seeing about 25 milliliters. By 20 weeks, it jumps to 350. Then the volume peaks at about 36 weeks at 1,000 milliliters. But here's the kicker. It naturally decreases as we approach term, dropping all the way down to about 250 milliliters at 40 weeks. And honestly, this natural drop-off is exactly why oligohydramnios, or dangerously low amniotic fluid, is a much more common complication when we see post-term pregnancies.
Moving right along to part 2. Visualizing the environment.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark visual contrast as the pregnancy progresses. In the first trimester, the amniotic fluid appears completely anechoic. That means it's pitch black, totally echo-free on the ultrasound. But check out the later stages. In the second and especially the third trimester, the fluid starts to look, well, kind of hazy with floating echoes. Do not panic when you see this. That debris is mostly vernix caseosa, which is that waxy white coating on the baby's skin, and if we're near term, it can also be meconium released right into the fluid. Totally normal progression.
Let's shift our transducer over to the placenta for a second. On an ultrasound, the placenta appears as a uniformly echogenic, or intermediate brightness, structure along the uterine wall, separated from the myometrium by this deep, dark hypoechoic band. When the placenta attaches to the front of the uterus, we call it an anterior placenta. Clinically, this is super common and perfectly healthy. But it literally acts as a physical cushion between the fetus and the mother's abdomen. Because of all this padding, a mother with an anterior placenta might not feel those early fetal movements or kicks nearly as strongly.
Contrast that with a posterior placenta. This is when it attaches to the back wall of the uterus, much closer to the mother's spine. In these cases, mothers almost always report feeling those tiny kicks a lot earlier and a lot stronger. But, and this is absolutely crucial to note in your charts, women with a posterior placenta actually have a slightly elevated risk of premature delivery. So placenta location is a massive piece of our overall pregnancy assessment puzzle.
All right, let's look at number 3, the measurement protocols.
Measuring amniotic fluid volume is a vital, hands-on diagnostic skill you're going to use every single day to assess fetal well-being. Oh, and for all these measurements, remember, your patient must always be lying supine. We rely on 2 primary ultrasound measurement protocols here.
First up is the Chamberlain method, also known as the single vertical pocket method. For this, you scan the entire uterus just to find and measure the single largest vertical pocket of fluid. Then we have the Phelan method, or the 4-quadrant amniotic fluid index. This one involves dividing the uterus into 4 quadrants, measuring the largest vertical pocket in each, and adding them all together. Now, for both of these methods, your transducer has to remain strictly perpendicular to the floor. And please, remember to ignore any brief appearances of the umbilical cord or a random fetal limb in your measurement. It happens all the time. Just skip it.
Let's break down the Chamberlain single pocket method a bit more. You really need to commit these numbers to memory. The Chamberlain method is famously known as the 2 to 8 centimeter rule. If your single largest vertical pocket measures between 2 and 8 centimeters, the volume is perfectly normal. Under 2 centimeters, you're looking at oligohydramnios, meaning way too little fluid. Over 8 centimeters, you're diagnosing polyhydramnios, meaning excessive fluid. Visually, severe polyhydramnios is going to look like vast, dark, echo-free spaces just dominating the screen. On the flip side, severe oligohydramnios will show a really crowded fetus with barely any visible dark fluid pockets at all. The exact measurements tell you exactly how severe the situation is.
And this brilliantly illustrates the Phelan method, or AFI, right in practice. You can clearly see the 4 distinct quadrant measurements mapped out. When you sum these 4 values up, a total between 8.1 and 18.0 centimeters confirms a normal, healthy amniotic fluid volume. Catch anything under 5 centimeters? That's severe oligohydramnios. Anything jumping over 18 is polyhydramnios.
That brings us to Section 4, recognizing abnormalities.
Remember how we said the fluid is full of fetal excreta and organic materials? Well, that's actually a massive diagnostic advantage for us. By performing an amniocentesis, which we typically do between 15 and 20 weeks of gestation, we can extract a tiny sample of this fluid to test fetal enzyme systems, amino acids, and hormones to look for congenital anomalies. It's like a liquid blueprint. Conversely, if we detect severe oligohydramnios, we might actually step in and do an amnio infusion. This is a procedural intervention, usually done during labor or in cases of severe second trimester oligohydramnios, where we literally instill fluid back into the cavity to relieve pressure on the fetus and the umbilical cord.
But seriously, what happens when our measurements fall outside of those comforting normal ranges? When you identify abnormal volume, your clinical strategy has to change immediately. If the fluid is too low, the fetus loses its protective cushion. This risks severe mechanical injury, umbilical cord compression, and poor lung maturation. Because remember, they actually need to inhale that fluid to develop their respiratory system. Now, if the fluid is too high, the mother faces risks of overdistension, premature rupture of membranes, and preterm labor. You literally must alter your fetal monitoring strategy the second these abnormalities pop up on your screen.
And finally, Section 5, explaining to parents.
As medical students, you've got to learn to step away from all the technical jargon and translate these findings at the bedside. You need to explain these concepts to expecting parents with absolute clarity and empathy. Keep it simple. Keep it reassuring. Tell them, the fluid is your baby's protective cushion and their lung development pool. When you're explaining the ultrasound, just say, we measure it in pockets to ensure it's not too high or too low. When discussing how dynamic the fluid is, let them know your baby actually regulates this naturally by practicing swallowing and urinating. It's basically great practice for the outside world. And most importantly, when they see that hazy 3rd trimester ultrasound and get nervous, reassure them. Say, that hazy look on the screen is completely normal. It's just the natural skin coating keeping your baby protected.
And that officially concludes our rounds for today. We've traced the incredible journey of amniotic fluid, going from its initial formation out of maternal blood right into a complex, self-regulated ecosystem that supports lung development and protects the fetus. We've mastered the Chamberlain and Phelan measurements, and we learned the critical differences between an anterior and posterior placenta. So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought as you walk the wards today. If this seemingly simple fluid acts as a baby's very first respiratory and digestive system, communicating their exact state of health, what other medical secrets might a single tiny drop of amniotic fluid hold for the future of fetal medicine? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you on the next explainer.